Hello and welcome to the Knowing Show. I am your host, Christene Marie, and I am so happy to be home tonight. I was thinking about it. I think I was home for about 5 days in total, the whole month of October, and this is my first day being back in November. So I'm excited to be back, and frankly, I excited to get into my habits. I've got my alarm set for 4 a.m. tomorrow morning. Whether I feel like it or not, I'm going to get up. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I have to. So hold me accountable. Y'all, I need habits. I need rhythm. I need to be living with so much intention. I had this moment 2 weeks ago, I guess, where I just had this realization that it's so easy. If I'm not so intentional, it's so easy for me to be putting other people kind of at the center of my orbit. Um, and well-intended, beautiful humans, and still, that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to center my life or orient my life around anything other than the superordinate principle by which I abide my life. And I talked a little bit about this yesterday in my long, very long post. For those of you who read it, really, there's something incredibly important about having something beyond you and me that we orient our life around. But what's so dangerous is when a person or even an event becomes our focal point. It becomes the center of kind of how we're orbiting our life and the decisions we're making. And it's so dangerous when any one person takes that center. And what we're talking about today, Sunday, and every Sunday is really, what does it look like to cultivate spiritual intelligence? And it came to me probably about a year ago, and actually was in the process of writing my book. So just a quick little side quest for those of you who want to better know you, for those of you who want to dive deeper and do the work. We've been doing these knowing workshops. We've got another one on Thursday. It's like a mini micro workshop, and we're just diving in on the knowing framework. So we're really diving in on what are core stories that impact you, that kind of cause you to be who you are today. And if we don't know those core memories and moments in our lives that inform who we are, one, we're missing a link. We're missing an understanding of how the past shows up in the present. And then also we're missing an opportunity to allow for real change in our lives, to continue that story to be told, and either have the hero come in and save the day, which is usually you or me today in adulthood, or just allow for some change to be made so that it's not just little you and me operating because we have this unfinished story in the past that continues to show up in the present and really rob our joy and ability to enter into the present moment now. So that's an example of what it means to do the work, is this Thursday, this workshop. But for those of you who are really wanting to do the work, the side quest that I wanted to make was take time to write. I have had so many revelations throughout my process of writing my book, even just journaling, not with any intention of anyone reading it. And then also a third modality is just writing on social media. I've gotten so much clarity about who I am, what I feel called to, why I feel called to it, and how I want to execute by way of writing. And then another form and kind of modality is through using a dear friend like an AI tool to just iterate with and take a concept and throw it in there and say, I want to create this type of experience, or I want to create this type of product. How do I make it bigger? And just dialogue with it. And you can do that surrounding business, but also every other part of your life. In fact, I was working on a spiritual framework for tonight's conversation, and I was using ChatGPT, and and frankly, the framework it gave me, I didn't like it, and so I really went inward as I was starting to create this, of like, how have I really come to know God over the last 3 to 4 years? And so this framework tonight is really the outpouring of my own internal going inward and kind of considering how have I come to know God in a really personal way, but then also just as I was really allowing myself to kind of engage with this bot. So thank God for bots. I want to talk about just the transformation that I've come to know and experience by way of these 3 steps over the last 3 to 4 years. And y'all, I grew up in a very, very Christian conservative environment. And so I was raised with a certain box of religion and a certain box of what kind of we confuse between spirituality and religion. And religion is very much so an organized structure, a box that many of us fit into, and we come in and we're told what to believe, how to believe it. And with spirituality, what I mean when I say spirituality, it's a living, breathing, almost like opening of ourselves. Every single one of us has we have spirit in us. We have a soul, we have a spirit, we have a mind, a body, and spirit is a part of us. And so when I say spirituality, it's almost like the activation of it. It's the opening up of the spirit. It's the kind of the coming up. It's like that little animal. What is it? The little prairie dog that like peeps its head out and is looking around. That's what I mean by, kind of opening up at the spirit and kind of coming online and being activated and being like, oh, like what does it look like to engage my spirit, to actually turn on this part of me, this part that's in every single person. And that's the part that allows for connection with God and with something other than you and me. And so when I opened this conversation of, do we have our lives circumnavigating and orbiting what? A superordinate principle. And for me, that superordinate principle is God. And so spirit is my kind of pathway to knowing him and hearing from him and being in relationship with him. And that is effectively, for me, spirituality. And so I lived so much of my life being religious, but not truly alive when it comes to my spirit, because so much of when I sought to engage with God, I was actually engaging the part of me that was more so my cognitive mind and my intellect rather than my spirit. And so in engaging with God in a cognitive manner, I'm going at him in an intellectual way, going with, perhaps it's in a modality of prayer, perhaps it's in the modality of reading a book about God or the Bible. And so I was going about it at an intellectual level. And then when my brother-in-law was killed, all of a sudden my emotions were activated, and my emotions came online, and all of a sudden I was just in this deep grief. And I came to God to some extent with emotion, but it was still very logic based. It was still very narrative based. And so when we think about narratives, and this actually kind of comes a little bit into the framework, so I'll dive into the framework officially here in just a minute, but this concept of narrative based, it's very much so akin to what I was writing about yesterday, operating within the religious box of you should, God should, man should. It's all shoulds. So in actuality, when we're considering and living life through the lens of shoulds, we're negating the reality of what is. And should and what is sometimes are really seemingly at odds. And if we're unwilling to sit in what appears to be the odd of should, where it's, man, God, I thought you should be good, and I'm experiencing hell right now. What's real and what's true? And so long as we're living in the box where it's black and white, then I'm never going to allow for true, honest activation of my spirit and even my own self when I come before God, because I'm not as I should be. And I'm technically wrong. So I've already judged myself out of communication with God to begin with. At the very beginning, I've already cut myself off because of shame and because of judgment. And I was talking with my partner about this just the other day. In David Hawkins' book, he talks about numerical values associated with different emotional states. And the higher up you go, and so the lowest ones is shame, and then guilt, and then pride and ego. And then kind of the higher up you go, then you move into love and joy and peace. And these kind of like higher states of, you're kind of moving out of, even when we think about like this lateral plane, like this lateral physical world, if I'm actually able to experience joy when most everybody around me is kind of grumpy, it's like the line at the airport where a flight gets delayed, you hear the audible ugh, and everyone's annoyed. Well, if I'm able to maintain kind of a higher emotional level in that moment, I'm able to actually, that's what the concept of transcending is like everybody's here and I'm above that in this emotional level. And that is ultimately what is possible when we think of relationship with God and relationship with bringing every part of us under alignment of the hierarchy of our ideal and God. When we talk about bringing into alignment, there's a transcending of sorts. There's an element of moving out of just the physical. Like my physical body might actually be really tired and ready to go home. The flight's delayed, but I'm actually able to level up on an emotional and spiritual degree and move up in alignment and under the hierarchy of my ideal and God. So how would God actually encourage me to respond in this way? What does my ideal say in terms of how I want to respond? And that's an element that actually lifts us out of what would otherwise just bring us down and bring us into this physical dimension of, I'm so tired. And then our emotions match kind of our physical body and how we're physically feeling. But we have the ability, even if our physical body is saying, I'm so tired, and it's like encouraging us to start getting grumpy. That's where, when we activate and turn on all of our intelligences, our physical intelligence, emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, and spiritual intelligence, all of them are coming, what I like to think of as coming into the boardroom. They're all coming in online. They're showing up and saying, hey, physical intelligence, I'm really tired right now. I freaking need to eat and our flight's delayed. So that's data set number one. Data set number two, on the emotional side, it's, all right, well, how do I want to react right now? Everyone around me is complaining. What does my ideal say about how I respond right now? And then the spirit says, well, what does God say about how I respond right now? And then the intellectual is, all right, I actually can create a real solution. I'm hungry and I want to maintain a positive, joyful self and being. I'm going to alchemize this and I'm going to go take action in this regard. So when all of our intelligence are working in concert together, rather than one being more dominant than the other, for example, if the intellectual is more dominant, it has a lot of potential to shame and judge the physical, the emotional, same with the spiritual, and judge whatever the intelligence and the data is saying. And so it's so important that all of our intelligence have equal voice. And then at the end of the day, we choose what action is going to be taken, defined by our ideal that we've already charted out, because it's nearly impossible to make a good, wholehearted decision in the moment if we haven't taken time to identify what is my ideal, what's my target ahead of time. You know, when you come into the crossroads and you don't even know where your end destination is, how are you ever going to choose the right path? So by way of identifying our end destination, identifying our target of who do I want to be, how do I want to live, how do I want to show up in the world, how do I want to engage with other people, and we've charted all that out, then it's going to be so much easier to act in alignment in that moment because we've taken the time to chart it out in the first place. So to this whole question of spirituality and to this whole question of just really creating a framework for how do I cultivate a relationship with God? Well, I have moved through many different times throughout my life where I've had to make different, not have had to make different decisions, but there have been different experiences where I've been more in relationship and less so in relationship with him. And so one area that I really, when I think about kind of the antithesis of what I'm going to talk about in this framework of really over the last 3 years, how I've really cultivated a deeper knowing of God, the antithesis of the framework is not being honest about how I'm feeling, not being honest about, feeling both emotionally and even physically. Like I am operating in the realm of how I should be, do, exist in the world, and it's black and white. There's no allowance for gray. There's no and. One of the biggest conjunctions that is so critically important is and. It's I really do believe God is good, and I am so pissed off right now. Before, if and isn't allowed, if it's either this or that, then I'm either always going to be silencing myself or I'm going to turn on God in rage because I'm not allowing for two things to potentially be true at once. And maybe I just cognitively can't grasp it all yet. So, for so long as I'm living in a black and white box, for so long as it's this or that, for so long as I'm living with should as a target rather than what is happening right now and allowing for the truth of that to come into being, I will always fundamentally be either cut off from God or cut off from myself or both. So, the very first thing that I just want to emphasize in this framework around spirituality and coming to know God, I came to know Him at a visceral level only after I did the work to know myself. And as I know myself, I know Him all the more. Because, y'all, if we are made in His image, that means we are reflections of Him. And so if I'm cutting off looking at myself and I'm unwilling to look at my own self, how am I ever going to know Him? If I'm cutting off even my own ability to go inward, we've talked about creation before. In order for me to create something truly of origin design, truly new, truly organic, and true to me, of true original Genesis, I have to be able to go inward and actually allow for an idea to come forth from within. Otherwise, I'm outsourcing all my ideas. I'm outsourcing my creation. And is that even creation to begin with? Because I'm just taking their idea and making it maybe better or different. But I'm sourcing from out there. Sourcing from within actually allows for true, genuine creation. And in creation, I mirror the greatest creator. So in knowing, in creation, I have come to know God so much more. But it took this willingness to look in the mirror, this courage, yes, but also, y'all, I got to the point of desperation. It was when I was finally broken open that I looked in the mirror. When my brother-in-law was killed, I was so devastated. But I wasn't truly broken to the extent that I was when my husband finally left. And I say finally because he was going to leave 2 years earlier. He ended up staying, and then he left officially 2 years after. And that second time, man, that just man, I was completely devastated. And y'all, it's in that devastation. There's a desperation in that. When you're so broken that you're desperate enough to change. In that moment, in that kind of like intersection, I threw my hands up and it was like, all right, let's do the work. Let's look in the mirror. Let's see what's there. Let's see what I've done wrong. How could I have tried so incredibly hard and have my entire life just completely fall apart? How is that even possible? And so I had to go look in the mirror in order to come to know the truth about how is it that my life is in shambles right now. And in so doing, I came to know God. Because as we come to explore our own selves, y'all, this is what's so amazing. Regardless of your religion, so many religions actually do abide by this common theme that God is in us, which is so beautiful. And I have found that to be true every time. I can look at almost any single human being and be like, man, I see a sliver of God in you. I see Christ in you. And so there's this verse in the Bible that says Christ was before all time and He's in all. And I saw that in myself when I came inward and came to know me. I came to know God. And I received this message the other day from it was probably one of the most raw things I've ever read. It was a gentleman, 50s, 60s. I'm not quite certain. And he lost his wife over the last 6 months. And he actually sent me a journal entry from middle of October and just said, this is the closest I've ever come. And actually, this is the first time I've really ever thought about taking my life. And he just was going back and forth with himself in this almost like argument of like, am I even worth it? Is it worth living? Am I worthy of living? And that's where this belief and this concept of God is in me that almost protects us from doing something as drastic as ending our own life. Because if God is in us, then surely he has a reason for being there. And in so searching, yes, we come to know ourselves, but we also come to know him. So the framework for the last 3 years, as I've done this work to come to know myself, there have been 3 really key steps that have been so incredibly important to come to know God. And what's interesting is that it's not step 1, 2, 3. It's actually like this wheel. You can kind of pick up step number 3 and then it catalyzes step number 1. So think of it more so as a fluid movement and a cyclical nature rather than a linear path. Number 1, this concept of listening to God and listening for his voice and actually taking this posture of presence has radically changed the way that I show up to engage with God. And frankly, even the way I was raised to engage with God, it was a lot of speaking. It was a lot of output. And there was no space like at the top of the funnel for an input from God to even hear from him to begin with. And so as over the last 3 or 4 years, as I've really come to understand presence and come to understand what does it mean to be here rather than living in the past or living in the future. And the future could be I'm living 10 minutes from now. I'm planning 10 minutes from now. I'm living 15 minutes in the future. What are we going to do for dinner tonight? What am I going to do with this campaign tomorrow? Or I am so broken that he left. Either way, I'm not here. And as I've allowed myself to sit in the ashes, so it's not, he's not here, I can't believe he left. It's now that he's left, how do I feel about that? And allowing my body, soul, spirit, every part of me to sit in the ashes. Because if I want any chance of rising out of them, we talk about the phoenix rising, we talk about the transformation of the butterfly. The caterpillar has to go into the cocoon to die to then become the butterfly. And we have to sit into the ashes and allow for the ashes to do their work and to allow for whatever parts of us to die along with perhaps the death of a job, the death of a loved one, the death of a dream. All of those parts actually need to be sat in and felt and experienced to the extent so that we can start moving through to get to the other side and see any real change. So this concept of presence, which was really catalyzed through sitting in the pain of loss and allowing myself to feel every ounce of sorrow and grief and allowing myself to literally weep when I needed to on the, not even just on the other side at the same time. I also it was like the haze that I had lived my whole life in started to lift. And all of a sudden it was like I started to see color again. Because in presence, we're not thinking about the future. We're not living in the past. And all of a sudden, these dogmatic frameworks that we've been existing in this box, right? When we're talking about the antithesis of the framework to know God and the framework of true spirituality, the antithesis of that is living in the box and living in the black and white and living binary and living in accordance with shoulds rather than what is. And so as I started to move away from that and started to just be like, okay, what is right now? How do I feel? What is true in this particular moment? All of a sudden, the grief was potent, as was the beauty. And it was such a visceral experience. And, we think about, I want to truly live. I want to stop living vicariously through other people. I want to stop living by way of their social media, their stories, their experience. I want to live my own. But in order to truly live our own, we have to be willing to sit with the pain and the beauty. And the beauty actually is funny. Sometimes it's actually easier to be addicted to grief, addicted to the negative emotions, addicted to just negative news than sit in the vulnerability of joy. Because, well, joy is actually fleeting. And so I know love, I know the beauty of it. And what if I lose it? So let me just sit in the pain. It's actually easier. It's more safe. Pain is known. There is an unknown and an uncertainty around joy because we don't know when it's going to be gone. We don't know how we're going to feel tomorrow morning, etc. So to be able to really be courageous and experience both the joy and the grief. and the pain and the beauty. That's truly present. And as I started to cultivate this ability to be present, I was eliminating inputs. I stopped listening to podcasts when I was going for walks. I stopped listening even to music. I took out my AirPods, earbuds, and just listened to nature and watched the clouds race across the sky and felt the breeze in my face. And I started to intentionally curate experiences that would bring me into the present moment. And the way that those experiences looked were really through the activation of the senses. I came to realize that if I was to truly be so present, let me turn everything online. And this is before I had the concept of all of our intelligences. It was like, okay, the five senses. How do I exist in the present moment to such a heightened degree through the activation of the senses? And it was so powerful to be able to experience life in the activation of the senses, because for so many of us, we live within the confines of our home, or we live within the confines of a box that's been set before us. But to step outside of the box. Tonight, I was on a plane, and it was actually really cute. I was sitting next to this mother and daughter, Amanda and Sarah, and Sarah is 17 years old, and this was her first flight ever. She was flying from St. Louis to Washington, D.C., and it was just really sweet to see through her eyes once again. She was like, oh my gosh, we're taking off. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. And she was like, look at this perspective we have on how small everything is. And it was just so sweet, because these are all thoughts I've had throughout my life. And it was so childlike and so exciting. And I was so grateful for the stories we shared. And frankly, she shared stories with me, she and her mom both, where it was so encouraging for me. And, I got to share a little bit about my journey of coming to know myself. And through stepping out of the box and putting ourselves in moments where we can really heighten our awareness of the present moment, we also get to listen. And so that's really step number one, listening by taking a posture of presence. So in true presence, we're eliminating the external noise, eliminating the external inputs rather, to allow for anything within to come up and be our own input factory. We get to conjure our own inputs so long as the external noise isn't infiltrating our mind, our soul, our spirit. We actually can truly listen, perhaps for the very first time. And in listening, God often has something to say. So rather than how I was raised, which was so much speaking at and to God, instead of sitting here and listening. And there's a scripture verse that says, the gentle and still voice. And then there's another one where it's like, God wasn't in the fire, he was in the gentle breeze. And so there's something about the state of just being so present when we become so attuned and even patient to listening to what's being told to us. We start to learn and hear, and all of a sudden everything becomes so much more vibrant, where we're able to notice the small subtleties in the leaves rustling in the wind and the voice of God. And so that's number one. Number two is, this was probably one of the most important ones for me, deciphering. So step number one is listening through that posture of presence. Number two is deciphering, the work of discernment. Y'all, I had turned off any semblance of discernment, any semblance of intuition, probably early on in my life, but most drastically throughout my marriage. I had this thought in my mind, which was, and this was modeled for me in the church and other marriages close to me, but so much of it was the husband knows best and the husband hears from God. And it was kind of very patriarchal. And so I effectively turned off my intuition. And then the Latin word of intuition is intuere, and that means to be taught from within. So I had effectively turned off my own inner voice. And in so doing, I also turned off the voice of God. And because I wasn't listening, and because I also wasn't discerning, I was allowing for all of the external noise. And here's the thing, external noise doesn't mean it's just our phones. It doesn't mean it's just podcasts and music. It also could be the voices of those very close to us, good, loved people that we trust, our community. But it's so important that we, in taking radical responsibility for ourselves, we must take radical action to be in tune with ourselves. Because am I taking responsibility for someone else's advice, or am I taking responsibility for my action on that advice? And so if I'm not with intention filtering every single input that comes in, much less so also allowing for my own inner voice to come forth and actually speak and be turned. I just love this concept of being turned online. There's a Wi-Fi signal, we're connected, we're awake, we're aligned, we're alert. And thus we're able to decipher. And in the deciphering, we get to come to know, is that my voice or is that God's voice? But we have to be quiet enough. That's why we start with presence. Presence is of utmost importance. And the listening is first to then be able to decipher. And in the deciphering, we come to know. And the reason why there is a difference between our voice and God's voice is because sometimes my voice might actually, there's a clouding and a corrupting of my voice in and of itself. So there's like different layers that we need to learn to peel back, because if it's like, oh, that's God's voice, okay, cool, like, got it. And then can I even decipher my voice from the voices of others, my voice from condemnation and like shame and those kind of like lower frequencies? Because when we start to really dive into the voices in our head and the narratives in our head, so many of the narratives that we actually operate off of were never ours to begin with. They were inherited, they were handed to us. And so even narratives about God. So there's our true inner voice, our true self, God, the true integrity of who he is. And then a lot of layers. It's like the concentric circle. So our inner self is at the very nucleus, and then there's narratives expanding out that have been handed to us, inherited by us. And then same with God. Here's the true voice of God, and then there's all these narratives that have been told to us about who he is. And this is where deciphering is so important. Is that a narrative about God, or is that God? Is that a narrative about me, or is that me? And in listening, in presence, we then can begin the process of deciphering. And then third, this is why third can be first. And so this is where it's cyclical. Y'all, the third is obedience. Because what's the point if we come to know ourselves, if we learn to hear God's voice, if we decipher, and then we take no action? Then did you truly know? I love this. There's a biblical story, and it talks about this man who finds this beautiful treasure in the field, and he's just out there working, and he finds this amazing treasure, and he is just blown away. He's like, I have to have this. And so he goes and sells everything he has to buy the field and thus get the treasure. That's knowing. That's like true knowing is taking action after you come to hear, after you come to decipher, after you come to learn, after you come to know. Action is like the natural overflow. And so when I talk about knowing, it's a yes, becoming aware. Yes, it's becoming aligned, but then there's an activation, there's an agency, there's an activation of action in regards to that which we become aware of. And so being aware is not actually truly knowing. There has to be a real change at a heart level that allows for it to really take root. And so third is obedience, the courage of acting upon the truth. And so this story of the man who sells everything he has to go find the treasure, if he was to find the treasure, see it with his own eyes, realize it's there, and then be like, man, that's awesome, and then just walk away. Did he really feel the impact of what that treasure could mean? Did he really come to truly know, did really believe that it's there? Because the natural outpouring and the natural choice and decision would be to go and buy it or do something to have it. And so for all that we've come to know, if there's no action, then I would argue that you and I actually don't know it, believe it, understand it to begin with. And so that's where looking in the mirror and saying, okay, what are the things that I say that I believe, but my behavior doesn't align with it? What are the things that I espouse to hold as a value, but my actions aren't aligned with it? True knowing is congruency. between our beliefs and behaviors, our principles and our practices. There's a through line on every single level of analysis through the inner and the outer world. And that's so much of what it means to live in alignment, is that there's a vertical, I'm aligned in terms of my inner being. At the intersection of the horizontal, the external world matches my inner being. So the way I exist in my being matches in the way I exist in my doing. And so in terms of coming to know God on this level, y'all, it was actually kind of through the process of obedience where I was like, I think that God wants me to do that. And I wasn't exactly sure, but I did it. And there was months of obedience where all of a sudden I had a real breakthrough. And this was at the end of 2023. So for about 6 months, I was actually just at a really, really hard point in my life. I was just really, really kind of in this other state of brokenness. And I kept making the small steps to obey God. And then December 31st, 2023, New Year's Eve, I felt like I heard from God for the very first time in my life. Like I discerned his voice. And there's something, y'all, about, and there's more layers to this that I'm excited to kind of work out in terms of the framework, because there's this whole other side in terms of practical living and the actual manifestation of existing, I guess you could say, that has been really, really critical to me being able to kind of almost get that breakthrough, like really be able to access God and know him. And it's costly. There's a cost, there's a price to not know God and to know God. And so this cost of obedience, it's so, oh gosh, it's hard to put a price on it because you get everything at the end. There's this concept of the pearl of great price. You know, it's priceless in what we receive when we actually get to have hope, when we actually get to know God at the level where I am getting my life and oxygen from him when otherwise I would be completely distraught. And there's this, you know, I read different books of people who have gone through hell and back, whether it was through the concentration camp or they themselves went through, this woman, she was completely paralyzed. She could only, I think she could use her facial muscles, but she couldn't use anything else. There's others who have lost their spouses, their children. There's this one man who, I think his wife was driving all 6 of their children and the entire van full of them were killed and he was left. And can you even imagine? He lost everything. And yet nestled in these stories is the connection to the divine in the most visceral way where they have come to know him as if he was sitting right next to them. And so that's possible for you and me. And I've gotten glimpses and tastes and even on a daily, day-to-day basis, you know, when I'm really getting vertically aligned every day, it's turning on each one of these intelligences, activating my physical intelligence, activating my emotional, my intellectual, and my spiritual, and tuning in and saying and listening. Like, God, what do you have to say to me? And y'all, I have found so much creative outpouring, creative ideas, innovation, you know, ideation coming from within. And so it has felt like divine revelation at certain points, divine inspiration. And that is in every single one of us. Should we take the time to be present? Should we take the time to decipher between the voice of ourselves, the voice of God, the voice of narratives about God versus God himself? And then third, taking action. And y'all, I've experienced firsthand not obeying. And I've also experienced the blessing on the side of obeying, of being brave enough to act accordingly. I've lost some really important relationships on a professional side, strangely enough, on the other side of not taking action and not obeying and not doing what I was supposed to do. And so there's this immediacy that's so critical in the obedience portion of this. Yet on the other side of obedience is we get to hear his voice and we get to decipher between, you know, it like is this beautiful snowball effect. And so I'm going to keep iterating on this framework, but I would love to hear, your thoughts if anything resonated, if there's something specifically that you've experienced and encountered, I'd love to hear. So with that, thank you all so much for joining me, and I will see you tomorrow.